Hello,
Hello.
everyone. We're very excited to have a panel today around the topic of observability planned for the observability community. Here with us today, we have Adriana, Amy, and Charity joining us. We hope to have a fun filled conversation. Would you mind starting out, Adriana, and introducing yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Oh, yeah. So I am Adriana Villela. I work with Ana at ServiceNow Cloud Observability, formerly known as Lightstep. Say that 3 times fast. um, I'm a senior staff developer advocate. Been doing the DevRel thing for almost 2 years, but before that was, oscillating between like IC, engineering and management roles. So yay. And I love observability.
I knew you before you were a DevRel,
That's
before you were into
right.
observability. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was just like trying to figure out what the hell this stuff was all about.
Time definitely has passed by. Charity, what about you?
Charity Majors, co-founder and CTO of Honeycomb.io. I identify as an ops engineer and probably always will, even though it's been a long time since I held a pager. But I feel like I picked up my first pager rotation when I was 19. So I feel like I've got still like half my life on call. So I can still call myself an operations engineer.
You paid your dues.
I think so.
What about you, Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Tobey. I am a senior principal engineer at Equinix, which is the largest data center company in the world. And I've been doing observability since pretty much my first job as well, starting back on Solaris systems in like 98, 99. SNMP and then into Nagios stuff. I'm responsible for some things in Nagios. I'm sorry. And like have been doing it all along. These days I do a little bit more kind of work in socio-technical space, but my initial work at Equinix was bringing OpenTelemetry into our entire Equinix Metal operational stack and pumping those metrics out to Honeycomb.
Nice. Very exciting work that all of you are doing and creating community around observability and OpenTelemetry. And I get to call you all friends, which is super exciting to have you all today on the panel.
Yay.
Sweet. So I think we're going to start with one of the spicy questions. And I'm going to kick it off with Charity. What is your definition of observability?
The correct one, of course.
We'll see.
Yes. Spice.
Okay. So back in the days when nobody else gave a shit about observability, the halcyon days of, I'm saying that even though we almost went out of business many times, I think we really tried to push this idea that there was a technical definition for observability, that it was high cardinality, high dimensionality, explorability, and all these things. And nowadays, like everyone and their cat does observability. It's like if you have any telemetry, you do observability. And you know what? I've come around to this. I'm all right with this. I feel like it's actually a great definition to say that observability is a property of socio-technical systems. So it exists on a continuum, right? I'm totally down with that because I think that it gives a lot of grace to people who are, in the early days of their journey. I don't want to be the person who's like, well, actually, you're not really doing observability. Like nobody likes that guy, so I don't want to be that guy. That said, I do think that there's a real kind of step function difference in, let's call it observability 1.0 tooling that was built off the primitives of, metrics, logs, and traces, where every time you gather the data, you have to gather it in a different format and pay for it again. So like you're gathering it once for metrics, again for logs, again for traces, again for APM, again for profiling, again for security, like talk about a cost crisis in observability tooling, like no wonder, right? And you're very limited in each one of those by the format that you happen to gather it in, and none of them can be connected to each other. The only thing that connects them is the poor human sitting in the middle guessing, right? Like guessing, eyeball, so let's call that 1.0. And then observability like 2.0 tooling, I think, is based on a single source of truth right? These arbitrarily wide structured data blobs, you can derive metrics, you can derive traces, you can derive all these things, but you've got one source of truth. It handles high cardinality. It handles, it's a more explorable sort of interface. So you don't have these static dashboards. You have an interface where you can ask questions and follow breadcrumbs, go and then what, and then what. So that's my very long-winded answer. I think that there's kind of two generations of observability tooling out there right now. And I think that they lead to two very different outcomes. Like I know I'm taking a very long time here. I'm almost done, I promise. I think that one of the socio-technical factors that you really associate with observability 1.0 is it's like a checklist thing. You add it at the end before you put stuff in production. Like, cool, I can monitor this. And for Observability 2.0, I think like the fundamental truth of it is it underlies the entire software development lifecycle. And your ability to hook up these fast feedback loops rests on how well you can, ask questions and explore your data and have this sort of constant conversation going with your code.
Awesome. What about you, Amy?
I think I agree with most of what Charity said, but I've been learning a lot from my work lately in kind of developing a new networking product. And one of the feature sets that we have to include in that today in a modern network as a service kind of product is observability features, and customers demand this. And we've been scratching at this, like how much do they need? How much should we build? How much should we hand off to either, ServiceNow or Honeycomb, and let those tools do what they're best at. And so what we've been finding with customers is like that operational part that Charity mentioned, right? That they are tired of this world where they have to go hire very expensive people who are often cranky, who can basically carry that mental burden of tying all the context together with the metrics and divining what the heck is going on with the network. And so what they're asking and what they're demanding from us and all of the other cloud vendors is give us the observability telemetry, which is mostly what they ask for, because when we talk to customers, like most of the time when folks we're talking to don't want to talk about cardinality. So they're asking for like, how do we get all the stuff we need so we can feed it to my feelings about AI ops aside, but this is a common request, feed it to our AI ops tools, feed it to our other observability systems that we already have so that we can start to leverage the skills we already have to get those insights. But it always drives to how do I get insights about this hyper complex system so that we can fix it and get back to business.
And sometimes folks don't even want to do the heavy lifting. They're just like, do it for
Nobody
me.
does, right?
Nobody
Because
does.
like almost none of our customers, any of us here, their primary business is not telemetry. It's undifferentiated lifter. They got a business to run. They don't want to be messing with this stuff.
Yeah.
So they want me to provide really high quality telemetry. And then they want you all to make that all super easy to consume.
Yeah.
That's very true.
I love that. It makes so much sense.
What is your definition, Adriana?
So I think I started out with, Charity's OG definition of observability, which carried me well throughout the years. And then I heard one recently from Hazel Weekly, which I quite like, which is observability is the ability for you to ask questions and get meaningful answers, which I really like because it's up to you as to what is meaningful, right? So what data are you collecting that's meaningful to you? And I think that's really important in our world. I will still say that I think like trace first for observability, no matter what.
Of course.
But I think like we really need to focus on the meaningful data aspect of observability, because like, sure, you can like instrument the crap out of a system and it's emitting a bunch of useless garbage, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So you don't have good data that you're instrumenting. Well, good luck trying to figure out what the hell's going on. You can have the best observability tool out there. It won't do you any good. So you're going to need to have, it takes a bit of, there's that learning curve of what's important to you. What should you be collecting to be able to do the thing?
Observability is a design problem. like in a huge way. Like once you've saw, like I feel like we spent a long time like just sort of like figuring out the underlying plumbing, which is just a prerequisite to what really matters. Is this is a design problem because there's so much data, and I think Amy and I share very similar thoughts on AI ops and like, but like there's two kinds of tools, right? There are tools that that pave over complexity, and there are tools that try to help equip you to understand it. And I will always be in the second camp, because at the end of the day, we are legally liable for the software that we put out into the world. Somebody somewhere is gonna have to understand that shit. And the harder you've made it, the more magical you've made it, the harder that day of reckoning is going to be.
Definitely.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I think we're seeing that a little bit with like OpenTelemetry, right? Like OpenTelemetry is awesome. It's, you know, this awesome standard that pretty much everyone has adopted vendor-wise. But then now we're looking beyond like that initial adoption of OpenTelemetry and like people really using it out in the field and making sure, I think OpenTelemetry's biggest challenge, I think, in the near future is going to be making sure that it's something that is easy for onboarding, because I think that can be really off-putting for organizations, and that can be really scary. And then that leads to the, you know, you instrument that code, I don't want to instrument my own code kind of mentality.
I think that the place that the metrics go really matters, though, because like we talked about AI ops, where I see folks really reaching for these tools. Charity called it paving over. So what we've done in the network world for decades now, and it's still the case at most organizations, is we have all these devices generating gobs of alerts and metrics. Nobody knows what any of it's doing. There's a sense that we should be able to correlate all of these events. So like some port fails on a core router, all the stuff behind it disappears. We should be able to roll all that up. And I'm using the should word, the way my therapist calls it, the S word, right? Like we believe these things that should happen, but the real world is much harder than that. So like these alerts just flood through, and people fight these alerts. Sometimes they've been fighting their whole career trying to get on top of this alert stream. And so they reach for these tools to make sense of the morass that they built for themselves, because they're not really empowered to go back to the telemetry and like dial back the cardinality or retransform how they generate those metrics to get higher cardinality that they can process at the end. Often they don't even have choices about what telemetry they get because they're buying network devices that offer, you get your SNMP or your GNMI, and that's what you get.
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh God.
Like,
yeah.
There is this world out there of legions of people that are just fighting through the noise still, and it hasn't changed for them. Whereas they're in the software world, we keep advancing the state of the art, but it's going to be a challenge still to bring a lot of the classic sysadmins and network administrators who are used to this world along on that journey.
I feel like one of the characteristics that I often think about when we're thinking about like transitioning from the 1.0 world to the 2.0 world, which is going to take fucking forever, no doubt. But I feel like it's part of it is generating from a push world to a pull world, where we're used to like the only way you could make sense of like a Nagios based system is by looking at the cluster of things that just alerted you and go like, it's probably that, right? And so you rely on, all of these alerts. But that's so noisy and it does not scale, right? But like as an ops person, I grew up thinking you only look at production when you get alerted. You don't have to look at it otherwise. And I feel like, the trade-off that we have to learn to make is, okay, we're only going to alert you when users are impacted, right? We set SLOs. These were our agreements with ourselves, each other, and the world. That this is the level of service we are going to give you, and we alert when when the outage is bad enough that users are being infected. But in order to get to that world, you have to agree that you're going to go look at your telemetry affirmatively, because most problems will never rise to the level of waking you up. I hope, right? Like most of the code you write, it has these subtle bugs that affect a few people, or it's a small thing, right? So like in order to have a system, in order to have a hygienic system that is not just like a hairball that the cat coughed up, we can't just keep like in the old days, like we were shipping code every day that we didn't really understand to be systems we've never really understood. And then we wonder why it's a giant trash fire, right? Like, and the way that we start improving that is by, not just making, the telemetry richer and better, but also by committing to closing that loop. As a software engineer, my job is not done when the test pass. My job is done when I have looked at my telemetry in production and gone, it's doing what I expect it to do. Nothing else looks weird, right? So like, that's asking, it's like, I like the technical debt metaphor here because it's asking you to like put in a little bit of effort up front in order to avoid there's this great graph that shows that the cost of finding and fixing bugs goes up exponentially from the moment that you write them. So like you backspace, good for you, good job, right? You find it in your test, good for you. The next best time to find it is right after you deployed that shit. After that, God knows how long it's going to take. Days, months, years, who knows? But like the accumulation of that shit is what makes this job a nightmare for so many people.
Yeah, it's so true. Like I think back to like, my old days of having to hand off deployment instructions to like our ops folks who
the run
they had no fucking clue what was, like what it was they were deploying. And I had to pray that my instructions were correct. And then I had to pray that they read my instructions correctly. And then they would deploy it to prod, and the quote unquote successful deployment, like things went correctly, was considered a successful prod
the files
deployment.
made it to the machine. We're done, right?
Right. Yeah. And so I love the idea of like, no, like, because otherwise it becomes a hit and run deployment, right? Or a drive-by deployment rather is a better way of putting it. Where like, it's like deployed. All right, great. Let's just leave it to fate. But I think like, paying attention, what's going on as soon as you deploy, like there's something to be said, because otherwise.
Because you, as the person writing the code, you have this context in your head that nobody else in the world has or will ever have. You know exactly what you're trying to do, why you're doing it, what you tried that worked, what didn't work, what the variables are named, like all this stuff. And if you can close that loop before you have to context switch another, it's so powerful. Like these feedback loops are what socio-technical systems are all about. Like this is the one job of technical leadership, in my opinion, whether you're an IC or a director or VP, your one job is these feedback loops to make them as tight and short and functional as possible.
I think that like nailed down of like engineering responsibility has been so important, and observability really brings it to the front. But a lot of people are just not paying enough attention or like not willing to do it. They're just like, my job is to code and that's it. And maybe I'm on call twice a year, but it's someone else's problem.
There's not much we can do about that though. Like a lot of times, right? Like if you are an engineering leader and you're trying to build a dynamic, powerful engineering organization, you have to either lead those people to care or lead them out, right? Like, because like the reality is like there's the customers that y'all want that have that engineering leadership and culture of like giving a crap.
Yeah.
And then there's the vast majority of organizations out there where the most of the people who are writing the code that runs our world are just trying to put bread on their table. And so as soon as they are done with the specification that they were given for their job, they yeet that code into Git and they run. Because like, why should they care? Why should they look at metrics?
But this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because what makes people like check out and tune the fuck out? Not being connected to the results of their labor. Like there's something that's like, what is it Dan Pink says we all want in our job is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. The purpose of your work, if you're so disconnected from it, that's all there is to it. I'm like, I'm not trying to suggest that this is easy or can be done in a one-stop, whatever. But I do think that every step we make along this path that tightens up the feedback loops, that connects people more with the consequences of their code, is good and valuable and pays off.
Or it's even
interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's even letting engineers understand customers. Like I've worked at many shops and with so many engineers that like that customer impact doesn't matter to them, or they're unaware of how the customers are properly using their software, or they themselves are not even using the software that they're building. That's why like dogfooding is so important.
I go into help teams all the time where they're just churning. this is like the most common thing that I go help teams with, right? Like they're just churning, they're not making progress. Like usually I can guess that without even talking to anybody. I can just like look at their Jira for 2 minutes and be like, yeah, they're churning. So let's go figure out why, right? And then you go look, and I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
People are not connected to their work. They're churning.
Okay. Right. I still forgot where I was going to connect that.
It's okay.
No, it's okay. We can move on.
Yeah.
I wanted to add one thought to the mix, because the overarching theme here is, like they deploy and then they go, or they write the code and then that's it. And I mean, ultimately we are failing the promise of DevOps at the end of the day, right?
Exactly,
because
right?
We did nothing to solve or to alleviate the problem, because we're still continuing to do that. Yes, we've got CI/CD pipelines. That's awesome. We've got automation, but we still have not fulfilled the promise of DevOps at the end of the day. And I think it's interesting, though, because I think observability is kind of, forcing us to face that once again, right? Because now they're like, these are the consequences of
now
not
that we
having
know,
proper practices.
I think the opportunity here is, now that we have the data to show the business how the consequences of bad engineering management are harming our customers. Like this we didn't have back when we started DevOps, right? Like we had no freaking idea how our failed deploys or any of this were impacting our business, right? We were just guessing. We're throwing dart birds, and like some of us were fairly accurate. Like, yeah, this is what's happening. And they go talk to a customer and they would confirm it. Great. Now we can go do DevOps. But there's tons of shops where they just never close that.
Yeah.
Right. And then you could bring the data in, though. And this is one of the things I've been slowly doing, right? Is I go talk to a team, be like, well, the first thing you need to do is go talk to your product manager, and I'll help them define some freaking SLOs, so you know what the acceptable abuse of your customers is, because most people don't even know.
Yep.
Let's start observing that. Let's put in stick an SLI on it. We don't have to alert or nothing. Just start looking, getting the data. Now I can go back to the business and I can go tell your director of engineering or your VP or even your SVP and go yell at them and be like, look at this data. You need to go invest in this team and change how they work, because this is what your customers are going through. And I have actually data to show it. And that's a game changer. That changes the discussion.
It really does. Side note, I always get so much energy talking to Amy, because like all these things I feel like I'm just like sitting here thinking about, like she's out there in the field just doing like over and over and over. And I'm just like, oh my God, you're so cool. What were we talking about?
Cool, but the day-to-day is like meetings and waiting for the opportunity
but like,
to go like, hey,
impact.
we could do SLIs here.
Yeah, but the impact, I mean, I just think it's so cool. But like you say, we're failing the promise of DevOps. I actually feel like DevOps is like, it's like the Band-Aid that we have on a self-inflicted wound that never should have happened. Like we never should have separated Dev from Ops. Like there's no possible world in which having one set of people write the code and another set of people understand the code makes any fucking sense. Like, and I get it. We were doing the best we could at the time. We're like, this is too complex. We got to split this up somehow. But like, I feel like the entire idea of having different people do these jobs, and it's a little bit unfortunate, I think, that we've kind of settled on going, oh, well, it's because ops sucks and we're all going to be developers. Like, whatever. Like, okay, fine.
That's not it. I mean, most of the time when this happens, it's like cultural inertia. Because most of the corporate world, they live in this world where they think about how, okay, I have some people who make decisions about the product, and then I go and I encapsulate that in some kind of requirements or design docs or whatever, and I ship it off overseas to be manufactured. So some other people do the labor. Some stuff shows up in a warehouse. I probably never even see it. And it goes out to distribute, blah, 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 blah. Right. This is like most of businesses in the world today are some kind of form of this kind of breaking the labor away from the design of it. And this is actually, I think, changing radically, even outside of the software world, where now product design is speeding up. You see kind of things coming faster. So now they're starting to look at what we're doing in the DevOps and going like, oh, maybe there was something there. Maybe expertise matters. Maybe the idea that there is a kind of work that isn't knowledge work is bullshit.
Yeah, I like that.
I think one thing that is also it's to some effect a consequence of this whole idea of separation of concerns, right? Which you see especially in like large enterprises. Like when I worked at like a small it was like small to medium sized startup. You know, I had access to like the freaking prod database, and then like I joined a bank. right after I wrapped up that job, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, we've got like a DBA for UAT and a DBA for prod." I'm like, "Huh? What
Yeah,
are
you know what?
you talking
We don't even
about?"
want you to log into your laptop.
Yeah, that's right.
Like,
Much
so
less
log into
download the
anything, that would
software
be
you
great.
need to do your job. Yeah,
It's changed a lot.
You know, we
I know.
borrowed so much of that stuff from the accounting world, where things like, you know, the concept of you shouldn't have the same person file the expense report and approve the expense report totally makes sense. You know, and I think that there are some concepts that, you know, translate nicely, and most of them really don't. I actually, the most recent talk that I wrote was called modern engineering is not incompatible with highly secure or like or compliance
Regulated,
environments or
yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. Yeah, and it's just like, because and it was super, like, I've been wanting someone to write this talk for like 10 years, and I finally was like, all right, this is not my area of expertise, somebody's got to do this. So I sat down and wrote it, and I did a bunch of research, and it was so interesting, because, you know, this is all probably old news to y'all, but I learned a lot about how just like, you know, it's really, engineers should not have to think about security and compliance in their day-to-day work. Like, if you have to think about it all the time, something is very, very wrong. It should be baked into the architecture so that by default you do the right thing, and you can use the accounting and like logging and like auditing principles of like your CI/CD system, and like engineers should just be you know, doing the work. You really only when you need to like spin up a new data source or like build something new, then you pull your security folks in, you make those decisions from the get-go. But like, you know, it's just like the entire frame. And what's so unfortunate is I think that security has this really unfortunate, you know, the security through obscurity they laugh about, but they all do it. But it's like they think that talking about how they do things well is going to be bad. And it's not. Like, I think that the only way we're going to make progress in this as an industry is if people start to realize that all their competitors are doing this well, and they're about to be outcompeted by the fact that everyone else in the world is somehow able to like write software like a modern team without being bogged down in the security theater.
Definitely. I know y'all touched about AI, and I wanted to ask a question about it. How do you think AI can help like teams adopt observability, or like how is it that AI can actually have some benefits to the observability world?
I think I've been saying about AI for a few years now, right? Like, I think the real opportunities lie in joint cognitive systems research, where the way we're using AI isn't necessary to replace humans in the pipeline; it's to augment humans in the pipeline. And so, for observability, I really feel that the strongest opportunities for AI are in kind of automated attention on doing correlation, basically like auto correlation, and surfacing that to humans. Not this idea that I'm going to eliminate all my cascading alerts through this, because that's a fool's errand that we've been chasing for at least my entire career. I don't think AI really changes that game, but if we start to think about it, instead of this crazy, like, we're going to make all the alerts go away, but instead, I'm going to help your people do more with less, right? Less context, less expertise, maybe less work. Obviously, now it gets super duper powerful, because that's the hardest problem to solve is how do I reason about this hyper complex system and draw out insights from it? That's where I think AI can help by augmenting the human, not replacing it.
I couldn't agree more. It's really about the inputs so much more than the outputs. Like, we are all familiar with like the problems of spam filters, right? Like, false positives are brutal, you know, very high possibility for failure. But like, there's so much we can do. You know, Honeycomb, we've been talking about bringing everyone up to the level of the best debugger. Like, increasingly, like the hard part is getting detail. Like, these socio-technical systems are made of just as much of our brains as they are the data. Like, an example I often give is like the New York Times and the Washington Post. If you just switched their people overnight, nothing would work, because so much of the system is in those people's heads. And the more we can bring it out of the people's heads and put it somewhere that other people can add to it and ask questions of it, then it like pools our knowledge and our resources. Like, one of the biggest things that blew my mind after becoming a CTO was how many engineering executives out there trust their vendors more than they trust their employees. And they're constantly susceptible to vendors who come up and are like, so give me $10 million and your people will never have to understand your systems again. We will tell you what to look at and we'll tell you what it means. And that because people come and go and vendors last forever. But like, come on, like that is just not going to work. But there are absolutely things that we can do to make your people more productive, better, to get better data in, to like pool your knowledge. I wrote that down, joint cognitive research, because I think that's so true. At Honeycomb, we built a little AI thing, Rob, which is using ChatGPT to, when you deploy some code, you can ask questions about it using natural language, just like what's slow, which is super useful because using a query like Explorer is hard for everyone. But like just being like, what's slow, what changed is super valuable.
And it helps those engineers that like just go around the room and then like ask a question to the person next to them. And it's like, you're now winning back time in a way.
So much time.
Yeah, and I agree with everyone on the stance on AI, because I think there's this overarching fear out there where they're like, everyone's like, AI is going to take our jobs. No,
I hope so.
I don't think we're at Skynet levels yet, but also I think personally, I like the idea of having something take away some of the cognitive load so I can focus on the cooler things, and also take away some of the biases that I might have, assuming that the AI is trained without the biases. But
trained with very specific
right, I guess that's the caveat. But I like the idea of like something saying to me, hey, this is where you look further, you might be interested in blah. So you look and you're like, sorry, AI, you're wrong, but thanks for pointing it out anyway. And I think that can be hugely helpful to just, I don't know, just take a load off, right?
Definitely.
Or like you're getting paged about something, it's a database you're not super familiar with. And it's like, something like this happened last year around this time, and here's what they did to resolve it. Would this be useful to you?
Yes. Exactly.
It's just your little helper on your shoulder that's just telling you all the goodness that could be going on in your system.
Anytime I think about something that or people spend a lot of time trying to get information out, whether that's like combing through data or trying to find stuff in the history or something, that's an AI problem. Like, they're so good at that shit. Yes. Let computers do what computers do best so that humans can do what we do best. And I know that like there's this fear that we all have about change and stuff, and some jobs are absolutely going to be lost. But many more will be changed. And I think that the way that we make this good for people is not by resisting it and fearing it, but by being thoughtful about how we like involve it and how we adopt it, and making the change graceful. Obviously, now we're going to start talking about government policies, which is anyway. But like Amy said, I hope part of my job gets automated away because I could be using those cycles in something else.
Well, so there's something else I wanted to maybe shift to from when you were talking, Charity, one of your favorite topics, which is the unknown unknowns. Because I think AI can eat up most of the known knowns, right? Like we will go and ask the chat bot and be like, hey, this seems like it's happened before. Has this happened before? And oh, look, here's all the incident reports from what happened before. Those are known knowns. We kind of know what to do. I think the place where today's efforts, anyway, we'll see if it changes, but I don't think it's going to change drastically in the next decade, are still not aimed at figuring out the unknown unknown, right? This is where I think humans are still going to have an edge for a very long time. Is basically like, we'll use the AI to collate the data to do all the undifferentiated lifting, but it's still going to be people that peer into that space between the data and go, I wonder if there's a packet loss somewhere in, deep in this network that's never happened before. We've never seen it before. And now you have a novel insight. And that's the place where today's AI really, like, it can kind of make things that seem like novel insights because it's approximating what a human would do.
Mm-hmm.
But those actual really tough novel insights, I think, are going to remain in our domain for a long time.
They always come out with these demos that show these like leaps of things. You're like, oh, I never would have thought to look at that. But like, those are impressive because they're rare. And at the end of the day, if it was the right thing, someone still has to go. And like, the thing that I keep coming back to that humans are good at is attaching meaning to things, right? Like, any computer can tell you if there's a spike or how big it was, but like, only a person can come along and go, this one really means something because of that.
That context that the computer won't necessarily always remember. What do you think is the current largest challenge in observability? I'll start with Amy.
Sampling. It is still, ask me again in 5 years, it'll probably still be sampling. Like, it's just, we're generating a wealth of data. There's a few places where we could probably tune things up, and generally we're not sampling a lot today. But some of the systems that we want to turn on, we're going to have to, because they do a bunch of, this is kind of circling back on like that tech debt under the covers. Like, as soon as we turn on tracing in some of these systems, we see that they're doing a bunch of busy work that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But the first thing that happens is it tips over our collectors and overloads our upstream account, and then we got to go turn it off. And so we don't actually get to figure out what the heck is going on. So I think like sampling and really just kind of getting control of all of the data we're generating that might not ever have any value. And that might is super important, because it's a by no means an easy problem to solve. It's probably the hardest problem in observability right now. It's like, just how do we get this to a rational amount of data so that my cost is rational, so that I can do more observability, get deeper insights in my systems, but you got to pay the bill. And so like, this is continually going to be our struggle.
That's
What do you
the
think
true
is
answer of a super user.
True. What do you think is the largest challenge, Charity?
The people don't understand how badly they have it now and how much better it could be. People who have spent their careers like slugging it out in the salt mines, using metrics, managing the overhead of metrics, not having high cardinality data, dancing around between metrics and logs and shit, they genuinely have no idea that the way they're doing it is the hard way. And they don't actually, nobody's optimistic in computers, because why would you be optimistic about computers? But like, until people see their data in our world, they don't understand how much easier it could be, how much better it could be. And there's this mental model, and Observability 2.0 is dramatically easier than 1.0, because it's just interesting, shove it in. Interesting, shove it in. There's no like custom metrics to measure or like manage and farm over time. There's none. But like, the difficulty is that it's a mental model shift that people have to, and I am confident that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, people will be, using the systems that, we kind of sketched out a few years ago for observability to understand their systems, because the rate of complexity is just going up, too high. We might be out of business by then, like we might have been way too early, but I am extremely confident that there will be no other way to understand your systems 10 years from now, but using something like this.
That's fair.
They are definitely not getting any simpler.
They are not. And ironically, what that leads to is this increasing reliance on heroes and martyrs, because if there's nothing knitting together all of your sources of data except the people with the intuition and the scar tissue who can make good guesses, you don't have any other choice.
I call them load-bearing humans in my
God.
work. Because like when I run into that, that's how I talk to the management tree about it. I'm like, you have a load-bearing human. This one person is doing this task, and if they go on a vacation or win the lottery, we are going to have a bad time, right? And that's the way to surface the risk. Is like, you wouldn't put a single, firewall. You would always do redundant, right? Like, so we need to make that function, and that's usually a good way to start getting over the line and get people realizing that load-bearing humans are holding the world together. Yes.
All over the world. And even as our rhetoric has gotten better about this and our understanding has gotten better about this, there are still these it's like the finger in the dike, so to speak. The little Amsterdam dude just like plugging the dike. with this. God, I got to stop using the anecdote. It sounds so terrible when you say it out loud. But like these people exist, and then they're doing a hero's job, but they shouldn't have to, and it's bad for everyone.
It's also putting a lot of trust and retention.
Oh my God, yes.
Very fragile.
Yeah.
Adriana, what about you? What do you think is the biggest challenge?
So I think the biggest challenge is organizations getting in their own way when it comes to observability, either because they kind of get observability in much the same way that everyone kind of got like Agile and DevOps is like important, but they kind of totally miss the point at the same time. And so we've made like a little bit of progress, but also not. And on a similar vein, like with OpenTelemetry, again, it's like, oh, I understand the benefits of observability. Let's get OpenTelemetry into the org. And then again, like not understanding like what they should do with that, either because, of vendors who oversell, right? Where I worked
we have
at
a tracing tool. You can totally take your traces and put them on a little island by themselves. Right? With no food or water, and nobody ever freaking looks at them because they're a tiny little island. Yeah, we'll totally do that for you. We'll take your money too. Thank you.
They'll be safe.
True.
Exactly. Yeah.
I never use them.
Yeah, and we get especially in large organizations, we get very tempted or drawn in by the shiny new thing that seems too good to be true, and you're sold on the vaporware, or like some exec reads an article about blah and they speak to a salesperson about it at blah company, and then all of a sudden they walk in all starry-eyed. So I feel like these are such huge barriers to actually getting shit done for observability.
True. What would you say is the biggest misconception around observability right now? And I'll start with you, Adriana.
Ooh, biggest misconception. I think right now I would say like people thinking that it'll solve all their problems without putting in the work. I think there's a lot of like people assuming there's a lot of like magical fairy dust that comes in with observability. And then when they realize that it's extra work, it was like, oh, crap.
What about you, Amy?
I think I'll extend what Adriana said, right? Like it's that extra work of like the need for understanding doesn't disappear. Ideally, as we get the data presentation into a better place, it gets easier to achieve. But the need for people to understand the world around them and to be able to synthesize new information from the observability data, that doesn't go away. It just gets more efficient.
What do you think about it, Charity?
I think the biggest misconception I see is just people thinking that observability is its own sort of standalone project that you can buy or do or check off, when in fact it's so interwoven with the development of software, iterating on software, deciding what features you're going to build. Figuring out how your product is working, figuring out what your users are actually doing, why you should care about it, where you should spend your time. Like, it has its tentacles everywhere. And there are lots of things that we do that make observability better or worse that have nothing to do with anything that's marked observability. And this is both, I think it should be both encouraging and reassuring to people, and also a little bit depressing and demoralizing, because it calls for a more holistic view of like, this is not, I don't think you can have like an observability project that you could just check off. It requires us to get better at understanding the mission of building something, which I think we're doing bit by bit over the years. Like, we're understanding more about how to build software that is better for our users, that is better for our engineers, that is more linked to the business, and like you were talking earlier about, God, there was this great discussion that was kicked off by McKinsey, of all people, about measuring the work of software, whether or not it's measurable, and of course they were completely wrong, and which meant that Kent Beck gave him a smackdown and Garrigay gave him a smackdown, and there was this great discussion about how you measure software development. But in one of the pieces, someone said that people have got to start realizing that building software is not like building construction. It's more like the design phase. And you would never say that a blueprint is better because it has more blue lines, right? Which gets to your point earlier, Amy, about how this all work is knowledge work, right? And so where was I going with all this? I don't know. I feel like it is indivisible from the act of getting better at delivering software. So I think that a lot, God, I swear I've taken up 50% of the airtime in this, and I really apologize. I must have had too much coffee today. But I feel like so many software orgs out there have kind of given up on saying that they're trying to get better at delivering software. And so instead they set these goals for themselves to kind of nibble around the edges. We're going to get better at observability this year. We're going to get better at CI/CD. We're going to get better at blah, 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 blah. But like the great leaps forward that you make, that you have to make in order to keep up with complexity, because you can't just hire your way literally out of this. You have to make these big leaps. And that requires taking a much more bird's eye view and being like, in order to deliver software better this year, it requires that we make these investments in observability, we make these investments in testing. And I feel like, in conclusion, building software is an amazing job. I thank my lucky atheist stars every day that I get to be in this industry, not like picking weeds and getting dirt under my finger, but like sitting here at a computer, solving puzzles and playing with my friends. And I feel like I wish that everyone in software could have as magical of an experience and career as I have had. And I think that observability is a big part of how we get there.
That's true. That actually brings me to my next question as we're getting ready to close up. What do you think is in store for observability for this upcoming year?
Dun, dun, dun.
The first person to jump in is okay. I'm not going to pick on one of you.
Oh, I haven't been keeping up on all the roadmaps and stuff. But I guess
So what is your wish? What is your wish that this year brings for observability?
I guess the thing that I'm working on is a lot of folks still don't really get SLOs and SLIs as much as I think it will help both engineering management and engineers on the ground just communicate better about what we're all trying to accomplish. Like if I had a wish, like it would be to drive kind of that understanding deeper just into our industry, just so I can go into a room and talk about the power that's available here and just like having the metrics to understand and not just get stared at like I just nailed a fish to the wall, right? Like just, it would just be nice to not have to start at zero over and over. But I'll keep doing it until we're there.
That's fair.
I personally want to see more people like besides like, we often associate, I guess, observability with like more the SRE side of things. Mm-hmm. And it is so not just that, right? I mean, it's everybody's problem. And so I want to see more conversations where like we get more developers giving a crap about observability and not just developers, like folks who are like planning tech projects, like software releases, whatever, like make sure it's part of their language, make sure that we empower our QAs to use observability.
Team. Everybody misses that. Give it to your support team. Gosh, like what a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Well, even your QAs, right? Like they're testing your software and they could use observability to figure out what the hell's wrong and tell developers, hey, this is why it's wrong. So that I want to see more of that. And I think it basically it puts us closer to, Charity's Observability 2.0, where it's like more of a holistic part of the SDLC, right? And I think that's where it needs to be, so that it's part of, it's baked into how we deliver software and how we code software and all that good stuff.
Definitely.
Everybody does a better job when they can see where they're going and see what they're doing, when they are getting feedback back from the system, for sure. Amy, I had this sticker that says that SLOs are APIs for our engineering teams. And I completely agree. Like if you don't have an agreement that you've all agreed upon, you're down in the weeds negotiating over every single decision you make about how to spend your time. Like it's absurdly inexpensive. It's absurdly expensive. I don't know. I expect that what's going to happen in 2024 is that everything's going to get even more muddled and people are going to get even more confused. And it's fine. It's entropy. It's how it goes. I guess my wish for Christmas would be that more people just have that feeling in their gut that you get when you see telemetry feedback to you about what you've done, and just go, that feeling that you get, this like you feel more grounded, you feel more certain, you feel more confident what you've done. Observability is the way that we can move swiftly and with confidence. And I feel like this is something we all know in our heads, and we need to learn in our bodies. And the only way that we can learn it in our body is by seeing it and experiencing it. So I would wish that everyone had that experience.
Most definitely. I love that. I love that, to keep that in store for 2024, as like find that fuzzy feeling when you start seeing your logs, metrics start showing up on your vendor. Definitely. Well, thank you all very much for the amazing insights you've been able to provide today on our panel around observability. This group is going to be coming back later in June to have a little other chat around observability. Stay tuned to hear about those details later. With that, we'll like to sign off and say thank you all for watching.
Woo.
Stay warm out there.
Yay.